So before we start, I just want to say thank you for coming. I know that it's snowing. I know that it's cold. I know that there is football. But I've waited a really long time for this moment. So some people know, but 2 days ago, I recorded a 40-minute message that detailed a lot of my pain in my life. And it was a final message to my mother, my sister, and her father. I asked my closest uncle, who's known me since I was born, to witness it. And he said no, because he wanted to remain neutral. And at that exact moment, I decided the whole world will hear my voice, and they will acknowledge my pain, no matter who wants to keep it secret. So I dedicate this to the little Nora, who no one listened to and no one wanted to hear.
Ekele Maria, ijute na Kraịst several amanyarị ịdị ngọzi n'etiti mmadụ niile ịdị adịgo n'afọ ikpuchi Yesu ma Maria dị nsọ nne nke Chukwu ọbụla ịbụ ndị ndị ahịrịọ kịta wee n'oge ọnwa Amen.
Amen. The violent departure. My first memories are frenzied jump cut visuals of damaged skin. I learned early how to distinguish injuries. That's from fingernails, a lady's nails, I thought. A bruise like a ripe mango. Pretty belts leave pretty welts. Cut to finding peace in the midst of chaos, barely out of toddlerhood with the background noise of my parents fighting. I found comfort while sitting in my plastic chair, mindlessly watching the characters move across the television screen. Cut to my mother standing somewhere on the street while I sat silently in a car. I remember the flash of street lights as a man, presumably my father, sped us away. As I pressed my head against the cool metal of the car door, I silently prayed the deafening sound of the wind rushing in through the sill would rip the door off and carry me away. I closed my eyes and imagined the moment as a commercial, but it was the title sequence of the story of my life, the violent departure scene. Year 7, Nigeria. Don't leave me here. I cried as she disappeared. Abandoned in a foreign land, in familial hands, I was too young to understand what it would mean to persevere. The months became years, and I yearned to be near and hear my mother's voice. I was traumatized by my mother's choice. Year 10, but he's my daddy. My father started calling me when I was 10 years old. After an absence of 7 years, including the 2 years I spent in Nigeria. I don't remember how he was able to speak to me without supervision, but when I heard his voice, I was elated. Here was the devil I was spawn of, the man who made my mother's life hell. A constant nuisance, like me. He was the answer to the violent variables in my life, and I was curious. He gave me a phone number to call him when my mother wasn't around, so I would wait patiently until she went to work overnight, and then I called my daddy. We had a young babysitter who was more concerned with her boy problems than monitoring a 10-year-old who was calling her dad. I don't remember what we spoke of, but we were on the phone for hours at a time. What do you say to a child that you don't know? How's school? Or what did you eat for dinner? That night, my mother couldn't find anyone to babysit me and Nneka. I did the work even when we had babysitters anyway. I knew how to bathe and dress Nneka for bed. I reheated the food from the refrigerator, fussing at her to eat or she'd be hungry in the middle of the night. And I told her how monsters would get her if she went into the kitchen for a snack. These were the times when we still shared a bed. That night, Daddy asked me to call another number and speak to his friend. He wanted me to tell his friend that I was alone with my sister. I didn't understand why. I knew I was young, but I was responsible. What was so bad about being home alone? So I called the number and a nice man picked up. I did as I was told, and I said that I was home alone with my sister, and my daddy asked me to call. The man asked where my mother was, and I told him the truth. She was at work. The nice man asked for my address, and I gave it to him, having memorized it in case of emergency. Not long after, a police officer showed up at our apartment door. You're supposed to listen to the police. I opened the door and let the officer in. He was a nice man. He asked me about my life while I played on the floor with Nneka. He sat awkwardly on the couch wearing heavy gear. Though I didn't understand what was happening or the gravity of what I had done, I felt comfortable with him. I could tell that he had children. I don't remember when my mother came home, but things became surreal. This was the end of my childhood. My mother called my daddy and gave him an ultimatum. Either he bought a plane ticket for me to live with him, or she would give me up, away to the state. Whether she meant it or not, the utterance of those words were the beginning of the worst 2 years of my life. Before I knew it, I was on a plane, alone, on my way to Minnesota. I clutched my Christmas gift as I stared into the clouds, replaying the scenes from that fateful night. But he is my daddy. What did I do wrong? It was December 1997. Year 12. The state of Minnesota versus Chiaka, Ekeanya. The trial seemed like years after the assault, but it was months. I was a world away, now living with my mother again in Florida. At least I could sleep at night without the fear of my father's hands. The trial wasn't for me. It was for the other girl he fondled. While I showered one morning, my father fondled my friend. I can still hear her pounding on the bathroom door. "Nora, please, please." She screamed as I frantically fumbled out of the bathtub. There was no shower curtain, and the door couldn't muffle the tone of her cries. I opened the door to her frenzied eyes. "We have to go," she yelled to me. "He touched me." My father, my secret shame transformed into anger, and I still don't know how to explain it. He didn't say anything, standing there pot-bellied in an open robe as my friend and I cried and screamed at him, leaving the apartment. The next thing I knew, we were in my friend's apartment building across the street. I walked the halls of the building and recognized the familiar smell of curry. I used to live in that building, sharing a tiny one-bedroom apartment for more than a year with my father. My friend's mom and younger brother were home when we arrived. Her brother was disabled and spent most of his time watching Barney. Her mom spoke in an unfamiliar African language on the phone. It was my friend's mother who called the police. I've already learned the lesson that the police didn't always solve problems, but this time I had no choice. It was the right thing to do. Even though it made the other Nigerians uncomfortable, no one said anything when my father abruptly started raising his prepubescent daughter. After all, my mother had threatened to give me up to the state. I was more mature than my friends. I knew more things about life than their daughters. There were never any sleepovers at our apartment. When the officers came, I sat curled in a ball on the carpeted floor thinking, why is this happening? Later, those officers said they remembered me when they were in the courthouse testifying at the trial. The state of Minnesota versus Anthony Chiaka, Ekeanya. She was rocking back and forth. I remember one of them saying, "I saw the concerned looks and faces throughout the trial, but they were for displaced reasons. I wasn't crying only for my friend. I was crying for me. My father had stolen a part of me." The other piece is online. You can find it on Google. The state of Minnesota versus Anthony Chiaka, Ekeanya.